mustard, a creamy honey mustard, like Dijon vinaigrette / dip that we're going to use for both the chicken tenders and the salad. We're going to make some spiced pears and some honey cornbread for it. So we are going to prep up our cornbread right now so that can get in the oven to bake because it needs a hot minute to cook. So we're going to start with 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, you can use like either heavy cream or half and half mixed with squeeze of fresh lemon juice. And that will give you the tanginess and the slightly thicker texture of buttermilk. But I actually had buttermilk today. So 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. Then we're going to do 2 eggs. So 1, 2. Grab a little spatula right here so I can pop my yolks. Then we're going to mix them into our buttermilk. And then I have a 1/2 cup of melted butter, so 1 stick of melted butter that we're going to pour in here. Scrape around, get all of this out. And then we are going to add 2/3 cup of sugar. So we're going to use a mixture of sugar and honey, but we'll get our sugar in first. So we want 2/3 cup of sugar. We'll add it into our mixture. And then I have our honey, which I'm going to open because I finally went through all of my other jars. So I had to go get another jar of honey from, and apparently I forgot to open it. Let me grab a pair of scissors real quick. But we're going to add in about 2 tablespoons of honey into our mix. But where we're going to get the most of our honey flavor is we're going to make this honey butter that we are going to brush over the tops of our cornbread after they've baked. And we're going to let it kind of soak into it. But we're going to use about 2 tablespoons right now. 1 and 2. Always messy with honey. Let's mix our sugar and our honey into the cornbread. Just want to make sure we get that all kind of mixed up. And then we are going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of baking soda. And then we'll add in our cornmeal and then our flour. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt, but if you used unsalted butter, you want to use a little bit more to make up for that missing one, to like 3/4 of a teaspoon to a full teaspoon. And then we're going to do a whole teaspoon of baking soda. And these are my kids' favorite cornbread, like little loaves. You can do them in muffins as well. They just absolutely love them. My daughter asks for these probably every single week, and I don't make them every week, but I think she really wishes I did because they are her favorite. So let's just mix that in, make sure it kind of gets completely incorporated. And then we're going to add in 1 cup of cornmeal, and you'll want to use yellow cornmeal. And then we'll add in a cup of flour, but we'll mix in the cornmeal first. I remember when I was in high school, maybe middle school, and we had sent my stepdad out to the grocery store to buy some groceries and to make cornbread. And at the time, I had no idea that you could actually buy white cornmeal. But he, sure enough, came home with white cornmeal, which does have a very different, it's not as sweet as the yellow cornmeal. And both my mom and I were like, of course we would send him to the store. And he got like the wrong thing of 3 different ingredients. But it was quite funny how he would manage to pick out the one wrong ingredient on everything. And just kind of funny. And to this day, I'm always like, it has to be yellow cornmeal because it was like the worst cornbread ever. Okay, we're going to add in 1 cup of flour, but we're going to mix this until it's just barely mixed together because you want it to stay nice and light and fluffy. And since it is a butter-based batter, if you over mix it, it's going to make it stiff. So I'm just going to kind of lightly mix it in there. There we go. We're going to incorporate it until you just don't see any more of that powderiness. You're still going to have a lumpy, chunky batter. Okay, we're just about there. Do 1 big scoop around. Perfect. And now we're going to spoon these off into our little mini loaf pans. But if you like to add any little things to jazz it up, you could add in some diced up jalapenos if you like the spicy cornbread, which I am not a fan of, but I know people love it. So I would just add in like 1 jalapeno diced up if you're going to do that for this. Or you could add in about a 1/2 cup of like sweet corn, either canned or frozen. I find canned works a little bit better because it's a little bit sweeter than frozen corn. But you could add that in there. I love canned corn in my cornbread, but everybody in my family says I'm crazy. They're like, you can't put corn in there. And I'm like, it has corn in it, cornmeal.
What kind of dog is that behind you?
Oh, that is a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel. And she's in the brown and black coloring of them. So we also have a ruby coloring in like that same breed. They come in like, there's also a Blenheim, which has it's like white and brown, and then they have a tri-colored. They're super cute small dogs. So before we had our little dogs, we had massive big dogs. And then, after we had our 4th kid, I was like, I can't do big dogs anymore. And our old dog, passed away because they don't live as long. But we had Greater Swift Mountain Dogs, which are, if you know what a Bernese is, it's a short-haired version of a Bernese. But I swear ours were like the biggest of the breed. So his name was Rollo, like King Rollo. And he was 150 pounds. And he was massive. And he thought he was a lap dog. He was the sweetest, most gentle dog ever. Like the best personality on him, but he was just too big. And I remember when he was getting older, we got because we had 2 of them before, and then we got a new one. So we got a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel. We got Loki, who is the kind of running around, but he's the nice like ruby colored, reddish brown color one dog. And I still remember Loki was like this big, and then you had like this beast Rollo over there, and he would just like walk all. It was just the cutest thing. And Rollo, you wouldn't have thought about. Rollo was terrified of him because Rollo was terrified of all things small. Like he was terrified of our cats, and I mean he was the biggest baby, but the sweetest dog. Although I will have to say these dogs are pretty sweet as well. Loki, he's my little mischievous one, which fits his name. He is the king at stealing food from the children. Okay, we're going to get these all measured out into our loaf pans, and then we're going to bake these at 350 for about 22 minutes. You can bake these in like an 8x8-inch pan for a little bit longer if you wanted. They take about 35 minutes for a bigger pan, but a little bit smaller or less time for the ones. And you could do them in a muffin pan, and this would take about 20 minutes instead. But I find mini loaves are the best. Okay, I'm just going to grab paper towel here. Clean up your baking dish before you bake because it just makes it easier for the cleanup phase because once it's baked on, it's a lot harder and you got to do a lot more scrubbing. Okay, we're going to go and add this into our oven. I'm going to give it a good shake here to even it out. It just makes it a little bit easier with the settling. Get any air pockets out. And we're going to pop it in here to bake up. So I'm going to set my timer for 22 minutes. And then when we take it out, we'll melt some butter and honey together, and we're going to brush that over the tops of it. And we do 2 kind of layers of brushing it over to really bring out that flavor. Okay, while that's baking up, let's get our chicken going for our little lunch here. So I've got 4 chicken breasts. I'm going to grab my flour, and we're going to make our seasoned dredge. And that way, we'll have it up. I always say I typically make a lot of like chicken tenders or whatnot when the kids are home on the weekend, because they all really love like chicken tenders, chicken like fried in any sort of way. And this is just a pretty easy thing to whip up for them. So we've got 2 cups of our all-purpose flour in here. And then our seasoning, we're going to keep it pretty simple today, because we're going to have our honey mustard vinaigrette is going to be our good dipping thing. So we're going to add in about a tablespoon or so of onion powder. It's going to give it a nice savory flavor. And we're going to add in about a tablespoon of oregano. We're going to do a teaspoon of black pepper. So it has a little bit of a pop to it. You could add a little cayenne if you want it to be a little bit hotter. And then we're going to do some Lowry seasoned salt. And we're going to do about a tablespoon of this in here. We'll mix it up, kind of coat it around. And then we're going to whip up our eggs, and then we'll cut up our chicken. And then this is what we're going to dredge our chicken in for the first round, and then we will add some panko breadcrumbs for the second round to give the breading, of course, a little bit more of a crunch, for our little hand breaded chicken tenders. Here. And then we're going to whip up some spiced apples, and then we'll make our dressing and kind of pop together our salad.
Mary sent you.
Well, thank you, Mary. We appreciate that. Okay, my rule of thumb is when I'm going to bread anything or dredge it is I use 1 egg per chicken breast or fish fillet, or, that I'm going to do. So we're going to do 4 eggs. And then I am going to be trimming these chicken tenders down into smaller, bites, or little like smaller pieces. Of course, I get an eggshell. So we'll trim them up, but it's just kind of 1 per full chicken breast. And that always makes sure. I always like to err on the side of having a little bit extra, because you don't want to be in the process of dredging and then you run out of your mixture, which has happened to me before. So now I'm always like err on the side of having too much. Okay, we're going to pop each yolk, and then we're going to just whip them up. Here we go. And just you want to mix it until all of them are incorporated, so you don't have any, big stringy pieces of egg whites. Here we go. That looks just about perfect. And then I'm going to get my oil starting to heat up. Now we'll heat our oil up on high until it's nice and hot, and then we'll turn it down to a medium so that we fry them over a slightly lower temperature, which will allow them to get nice and golden brown, and then cook all the way through. But the key to kind of making sure that they cook up nicely is don't just bread up a huge, big, fat chicken breast like this. You're going to want to fillet them in half. That is going to allow them to be a lot thinner. You don't have to pound them out, filleting them in half. And then when you do it, just kind of cut up against the, like the grain. So it's going to be a little bit more like ridge or rough on the inside, but that's going to give you a more tender piece of chicken. And since I'm going to do kind of tenders, I'm going to then cut them down again into 4. So these will be more like, nice long chicken tender strips, which is going to allow them to cut up or cook up fairly quickly. And if there's natural breaks in the chicken, I always like to kind of cut along those. But again, we're just going to go right through the middle here. and kind of against that grain. And that's going to cut the fibers apart, which is going to leave a more tender and juicy piece of chicken at the end. And then we've got a natural nice break right here. There. And then again, if you see like little pieces of fat like this, trim that off because that's just going to be very rubbery on there. So you don't want to leave that on your final end product of it. And sometimes you get chicken tenders or chicken breasts like this that are really well trimmed up, and sometimes you need to do a little bit of work to get them there. And let's see, a little bit of fat. So we'll trim that off. And then again, fillet it in half. So I will say 4 chicken breasts is going to make a good amount of chicken tenders.
So you got a question? What brand knives do you like?
So I really love the Wusthof Classic. I've actually had my knife set since I got married. So they're about 17 years old. I just sharpen them up, with the honing steel that comes with the set every couple of weeks, depending on how much I use them and how much I cut them with. But absolutely love them. And I feel like if you have a knife for almost 17 years and it's still going strong, then it's working well. Okay, the trick is this is your dirty hands from your chicken. So this is what we're going to dredge with. This is your clean hand. This is my knife hand. This is what I can use to kind of manipulate things. The key to making the whole dredging process a lot easier is to make sure that you use one hand to do it so your thing doesn't get too messy. So we're going in, and this is our first kind of dredging, our first layer. We're going to get these kind of base spices on it, and then we'll go into the egg wash mixture and then back in, but we're going to add panko breadcrumbs after this. You don't want to have panko breadcrumbs on your first round because they won't stick to the chicken and it'll just fall off and it's just more of a mess. So this one is going to create that binder that's going to allow that second coating to really stick. So just in here, and it might have seemed like we used a lot of spices in there with everything, but trust me, you want it to be well seasoned and well flavored because this is all the flavoring that's happening on the chicken. So if your dredge is bland, then your chicken's going to be bland. And once you've kind of fried it up, there's not much you can do to add a bit more flavor.
A couple questions is what all is in there, and is cornstarch in the flour as well?
So no cornstarch, just flour, but we used about a tablespoon of onion powder, a tablespoon of oregano, a tablespoon of Miss Lowry seasoned salt, a teaspoon of black pepper, and just kind of that's what we use today. It's very simple. It kind of was going with a more savory on it. The Lowry seasoned salt and the onion, the like powderized onion, is going to help give it a nice golden color to the frying. If you want an even more like an amber color, you can use some paprika to get that there. But I feel like the spices you use are what you can kind of change up to make each time you make a chicken a little bit different. So if you wanted to add some heat to it, you could add, go with some Cajun spices, add in some, red pepper or cayenne pepper. If you want to go with an Italian flavor, use Italian seasoning, lay heavy on the basil and, with those things so it's one of those things where the spices you use can really change up the flavor to it a lot. Okay, we've got our first round just about done, and then we're going to add in our panko breadcrumbs. There we go. So using my clean hand, we're going to add in about a cup of seasoned panko breadcrumbs. Now, there's a lot of different things you can use for, the panko breadcrumbs. You can also use like crushed up corn flakes. I've seen Rice Krispies. I've seen potato chips, regular breadcrumbs. I've seen a lot of different things used to give you that crunch flavor. I do love the panko because, you can get them already seasoned and they have pretty good flavor. But, sky's the limit. There's a lot of different things. Crushed pretzels work as well. So into the egg wash, and as you can see, that kind of creates a binder with that first dredging. And then we're going to add on, and I always just like to give it a nice firm press down to completely coat it up. And then once we get a good batch, our oil should be nice and hot and about ready to put our first batch of chicken tenders in to fry up. Now, I always say, like, with this, you keep your hands, because look, this is just the beginning. After 2 of them done, by the time you get through all of these dredged, you're going to have pretty, breaded fingers. So I always say, keep it and manage. You've just got to kind of train yourself in the beginning. I used to do it all the time, and I'd be like, oh, accidentally used my other hand. So always try to avoid that whenever possible. And that way, if you have, like something you need to attend to, like your oil, or, you wear big sweatshirts like me where the sleeve is constantly falling down and you need to pull it up. This is where you got your clean hand for. Here. And we're going to get this going. And then I think our oil is just about hot and ready. Kind of feeling a nice residual heat. And then our cornbread is cooking up in the oven. We'll make our honey butter here in just a little bit. And whip up our salad and make our honey mustard dressing. Let's see. Kind of feeling that residual heat here. So since I have a good start on my dredging here, I'm going to go grab a small drop of water with my clean hand, and we'll see if this is ready to drop our first sets in. This is why I keep your hand clean. I just found it is just the best way. It's just a small drop. If it sizzles right away, you're ready. You're almost there. It took about a second or 2 to sizzle up. So there we go. We're going to add in our chicken. And you can see when you pop it in, and I'm going to turn it down to about a 5, but it should sizzle right away. If yours isn't sizzling and bubbling right away, then it is not hot, which is why I test it with just the smallest drop of water, because that lets me know if it's hot or not. You don't want to put your chicken in a like a cold oil, or oil that's just like room temperature, I should say, because that's going to give you a soggy fried chicken versus a crispy fried chicken. So we've got it. I had it heating up on a high. I've turned it down to a 5. Again, the reason why I do it on a high and then turn it down instead of just over a certain temperature is because I want my oil to be just a smidge hotter when I put all the chicken in, because when you put it in, the cold chicken is going to bring down the temperature of your oil. So you don't want it to drop down too much. Okay, let's get these guys breaded up. Then we're going to work on our spiced pears and our honey mustard vinaigrette for our lunch today. We'll melt up our butter to make our honey butter to put over our cornbread, and then we'll be able to eat soon. I said, there's no clean way to do the breading of the chicken, but if you're nervous about it, you've never done it before, it is delicious, and you should definitely try it.
Yo has a question for you.
What is for dinner tonight? So I actually have a plan for dinner tonight. I'm going to be making I had said earlier, I have some chuck roast that I need to make up. So we're going to do kind of a beef bourguignon chuck roast dinner with mashed potatoes and, for certain, some sourdough rolls on there. So I'm going to do my 6-hour sourdough rolls for them to kind of set up, or I would say not quite 6 hours, like 5 hours or so. So they've got a little bit of yeast in them, but they're mainly from the active sourdough starter. So that's what we're going to have for dinner tonight. And then I think I might do some caramelized carrots and onions to go with it as well. And then a green vegetable of sorts.
And how was Santa Lucia?
Santa Lucia was awesome, fun, and the food was delicious. We are down to just a few. I got one loaf of saffron bread that Teddy keeps trying to steal from, and I was like, no, this is for my friend. I'm bringing it to her tomorrow, so you can't eat it. But pretty much we have 4 rolls left, and we're out of our saffron bread. which everybody's been loving. And the Swedish meatballs were delicious. The Swedish pancakes were awesome last night. The kids, of course, felt the need to tell me that momols, that means mother's mother in Swedish, but my mom's Swedish pancakes were better. So, and I'm like, yeah, well, she makes them all the time. I was just like, I'm sure, because she probably does some secret thing that she hasn't told me yet to make sure hers are the best. But they were like, momos are better. But it was fun. We had a lot of fun doing our Universal Yums box where we had Scandinavia, so it worked well with Santa Lucia. And the kids had a lot of fun. We're working on that video to post it up for you guys on there of us trying all the different things. And it kind of turned out where I kind of expected it much because, I've been to Sweden before and I've had a lot of Swedish things, but my kids were not a fan of about 90% of the little treats that came out of there. Just very different flavor profiles. They did have a couple that they loved, but it was interesting. I will say it was one thing that's funny is my oldest daughter, who is she has an interesting palate. Everything that in our family we loved, she disliked, and everything we disliked, she loved. So she had like the polar opposite of us in our taste buds. And then, as you can imagine, Evie, my kid who likes nothing, didn't like very many things. But Teddy was cute. Okay, finally down to my last dredging here. And look, we barely made it, but just enough to kind of cover it. We'll get this out, coat this guy up. And as you can see, my fingers are practically chicken tenders too. And then we'll be about ready to flip these here in just a second. I'm going to give a nice little rotation. And kind of know when they're ready as I'll start to see a little golden brown kind of coming up on the edges. I'm going to wash my hands since it's quite messy. And then we can get over there. Unfortunately, there is really no good way to get into this without washing or without getting your hands completely breaded. I feel like back in the, late 90s or mid to late 90s, early 2000s, you had the shake and bake, but the shake and bake never gives you the right ratio of things. So it's, all the breading falls off on them. So I was never a big fan of it. Okay, let's grab our pears over here. We're going to bring them over to the side over there. That way we have our chicken. And we're going to just peel up our pears and slice them and start the cooking. The nice thing about pears over, say, apples is they're going to cook in a fraction of the time, but they have very similar flavors and you'll season them nice. But they're just a nice option to use, but you don't need to cook them as long to get them tender. Let's get our chicken tenders flipped over. There we go. We've got this nice kind of golden brown crust on it. Beautiful. Now again, with this, cooking it up. Cook it over a medium-low heat, so I've got it right at a 5. That way it cooks a little bit longer before browning up the outside of it. That way you'll have time to cook it all the way through. You don't want to cook it over a high heat because if you cook it over high heat, what happens is you will have your outside golden brown and crusty, but your inside will still be raw. So lower is better. So we've got our Bartlett pears here. And I always like to use Bartlett pears when they're ready. I know they're ready is when you've got brown spots on them. That's when they're going to be sweet and flavorful. You don't want them to be too firm because they'll be really hard and not as sweet. And you can keep the skins on if you want. But again, I prefer the skins off because I find that they're just a little bit more gritty in there.
Mary sent you a gift.
Well, thank you, Mary. We
And
appreciate that.
do you post the recipes anywhere?
I do post for our members. I post recipe cards a couple times a month for them. But for everybody else, we do post our lives on our link on our page, so everybody's able to kind of rewatch and cook along with me again. And I do try to make sure that I go through every step of the cooking process so that everyone you know exactly how much of the ingredients to use, how high to cook it, how long, so everybody can recreate these recipes.
And how old were you when you started cooking?
So I started cooking, like legit cooking dinner for my family when I was 13 years old. I took over when I was 13, one meal a week, and then that slowly turned into cooking 5 days a week for my family, like my family growing up. And I've always loved cooking. I've always had, fun trying to explore different flavors, spices, techniques, testing things out. And so I've been doing it for a long time, and I've just kind of improved over the years. I will say the cook I was when I was 13 is very different than the cook that I am now. But it's funny, there are still a few dishes that I cook that are the same dishes back then, like some family ones like yellow chicken. That's just a classic that I love on there. And Swedish gingerbread cookies that I make every year, pepparkaka. Although the first time, I remember my sisters and I, so I have two sisters, and normally it was my mom who always made the Swedish gingerbread cookies because the recipe was in Swedish, and she was the only one who, read and spoke Swedish. So she normally would make it. And one year she was like, "Oh, do it. I'm really tired. I'm going to go to bed, but it's right there. You should be able to figure it out." So this was before, like computers and all of those things were readily available to where you could just, translate anything you wanted. We did not have that back then. This is, like 1999. And we're there and we're trying to read these recipes. And of course, not only was the recipe in Swedish, which we kind of managed to figure it out, but the measurements were all in the metric system, not in the US customary. Thankfully, my mom had some Swedish measurement systems like the deciliters to work with, but it was tricky. They did turn out, but you had to make the dough the night before and it had to sit over the counter the night things, and it was very tricky. Here, let me go grab our cornbread out of the oven. I'm going to turn this down just a smidge, let it cook there. But I still remember that to this day, how my mom just went to bed and we figured it out. Luckily Swedish was similar enough to, English and German words, which we all are fairly good at. Perfect. So we were able to, kind of let her figure it out exactly. So here is our beautiful golden honey cornbread. It has this nice, lovely kind of golden brown color to it from the honey and the sugar, but that honey gives you that nice brown color. That's why if you ever make like pizza dough, they'll tell you to put a little bit of honey in it to make sure you get a nice golden crust on it. So we have our honey cornbread here. And what we're going to do is we are going to melt some butter and a fourth cup of butter and 2 tablespoons of honey in our pan. And we're going to boil it for about 30 seconds. And then we'll brush over our cornbread to make the most delicious honey butter cornbread. So I've got it right here. I'm going to just slide that way a little. We'll melt this up first. Now, what you want to do is melt your butter first, then add your honey in and let it think. Don't put it all in at the same time, because if you boil honey too long, it turns into like a candy. And we don't want that.
So you got a question? Does your husband cook at all?
My husband does not cook. He has what we call Papa Bear meals. And my children, I say they make it through the Papa Bear meals when I'm gone. But those meals are a collection of what he can find in the fridge and pantry that involve absolutely no cooking whatsoever. It's more like a Meghan Markling it. He's assembling it together on a platter, aka a plate, for them to eat. He does balance out and make sure they get all of the food groups in there. but that usually consists of, like carrots and an applesauce pouch. And there's always a fruit snack of some sort on there. So they do like that part component of it. But it's kind of like peanut butter crackers, got it. Cheese slices and crackers, boom. It's something with a cracker of some sort. But he makes sure he hits all the food groups. So, you got to give him that. When I was doing both my doc program and my master's when I was, years ago, and the kids were young, and I had to, had classes late or on the weekends to kind of get it in there. I would come home from class and my kid, they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness you're home, Mom. We're so hungry." But I would go out and I would buy like Lunchables and all sorts of things. I'd make up some things to prep together for them to eat while I was out and about. But they were always very, very excited for when I got home to make real food. They were all done with a Papa Bear meal. So, no, I think they've been spoiled too much. They never had to deal with, my husband always talks about whenever his dad had to cook, they always had wiener winks, and was never a favorite meal of anybody. Okay, I'm going to turn my butter off since we're just about there. Let's look at our chicken. Oh, looks perfect. So I'm going to grab out a baking sheet here, and we're going to line it with some paper towels so that we can soak up the extra grease from it that allows it to stay nice and crispy. And then let me move this butter to the side. So you can either put your chicken on like a cookie cooling rack or I do paper towels just like bacon. Make sure when you're taking it out, you're going to put it on the grease side down or the oil side down. That way it gets nice and crispy because you want it to soak up. You don't ever want to leave it on a flat cooking surface because a flat cooking surface is going to make it soggy wherever it touches because the moisture will kind of stay, there. There we go. So we've got our first round in. We'll get our second round frying up. And then in here, and you just want to make sure when you put it in here that each piece of chicken tender has enough room to where it's not touching or resting on another chicken. That's key to making sure that they all will cook up evenly and crisp up nicely. Okay, so little space between each one, and then flipping them over halfway through. Let me grab. Okay, let's get our pears in here real quick so they can start cooking up. But again, pears need a fraction of the time that apples need to get nice and soft and tender. And they need a little bit less sugar than apples because pears are a lot sweeter, especially when you do them kind of cooked up. But they have a lot of similar flavors to it. One of the things that I like to make, which I don't ever tell when I make it, I don't tell people that it is it, but I will make like a apple pie using pears. And everyone always talks about how good it is, but I always like to keep them guessing to see if they can figure it out. But using the pears, it gives you just a slightly different flavor, but it is so similar and it is so delicious that everyone's like, this is the best apple pie. And then eventually once they've, stumped for a while, I'm like, it's actually pears. But they cook so well and they taste so well with those like spices. But it's a fun thing to make with it. That little like pear turnovers or little like pear galette, all of those things are just really delicious.
Earth Angel, since you get.
Well, thank you, Earth Angel. We appreciate that. Got these guys sliced up here, and then we're going to add in a little bit of butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon, and just a squeeze of lemon juice, and then we'll let that start cooking up. Okay, let me grab my lemon juice or my lemon. Use fresh lemon. Fresh lemon is always going to taste better and nicer than like the pre-squeezed stuff. And you don't need a lot. Adds a little bit of tartness to it. So I used about a third of a lemon. We're going to use the rest of that in our vinaigrette. Okay. Let's get some cinnamon here. For about these 5 pears, you're going to use about a teaspoon of cinnamon. You could always add in, like a half a teaspoon of cloves, like a pinch of nutmeg if you want to go for that Christmassy thing, and some allspice. But I'm going to just keep it really simple with just the cinnamon because it's going to be lovely. We're going to use brown sugar because brown sugar, I think, tastes better, gives you more of a rich flavor. With pears, you don't need to use as much, so I'm just going to use a half a cup of brown sugar. Apples, I would use a bit more, especially if you're going to use like a Granny Smith, which is a much tartar apple. And then we're going to put in about a tablespoon of butter. And last, but definitely not least, a pinch of salt. And it might seem weird, but that little bit of salt kind of cuts through the sweetness to where you actually enhances that cinnamon and pear flavor. I'm going to turn this heat over. I'm going to do, over a medium heat, and we'll let that kind of cook up. The natural juices from the pear will start to kind of seep out here in just a second. And then you'll kind of get this nice little juicy thing. And then we add some cornstarch in later to thicken it up so you have a little bit of a gel that clings to it. Let's add our honey into our butter so we can kind of coat the top of this. We want about 2 tablespoons of honey in here. So just about there. And again, we'll mix it up and kind of dissolve it there on there. There. You don't want to go with there, but I will say it's a good amount of honey on there. Make sure if you are using like honey and you bought it or you have it, that you taste it to make sure you like it. I once got this honey. Perfect. I once got this honey from, and I don't know if they were used a lot of like weird flowers, but it was the weirdest tasting honey. And everything we made with it, it took me like a week to figure out that it was the honey that was causing this strange flavor. And it just had a very floral flavor to it. So just make sure if you're going to buy, like when you get a local one or one there, that you've tried it if they have a sample there. Although the best honey that I ever got was at this apple orchard earlier in the fall. It was such a sweet, and it had almost like an apple flavor to it, but it was a whole orchard. But it was such a wonderful honey. And then we also got this honey at this caves system where they had like an orchard nearby, and that was good. We brushed half of our honey butter over our cornbread, and then we let it soak in and sit in. And then right before serving, we brush it again. That allows those flavors to truly seep in and give you that really lovely flavor to it. Okay, let's get on to our honey mustard vinaigrette. I'm going to just clear this over here so that I've got a good amount of space to work with. I'm going to bring my stuff over there. So we're going to use a little bit of mayo to make it creamy. Grab all my spices while I'm over here. Olive oil, apple cider vinegar. We're going to use a little bit of garlic, Dijon mustard, a little bit of ginger, and then just got to grab my other 2 things right over here for our salad. Gives me a little bit more space to work since I have the chicken over there. Okay, we're going to start, and this is going to be for dipping our chicken in, and over we're going to do just a spinach and arugula salad with some walnuts on it, and then you can put the spiced pears on it as well. But we're going to start with about 1/4 cup of olive oil. And we don't need to use as much olive oil on there because we're also going to be using the mayo as part of that base for it.
For a Christmas potluck, what would be your suggestion of bringing?
Ooh.
Something homemade.
Something homemade. Well, if you're going for like a sweet type thing, an apple crisp or a pear crisp always works well because that's something that is easy to transfer. But if you have to cook a food, I would say, I'm trying to think what is going to be hold really well for it. Trying to think. Because you want to, if you're going to do like a protein type dish, you could make a big like chicken pot pie or mini pot pies. I just made a bunch of mini pot pies the other day for a friend. I made 12 and then I had 3 more little ones to give to my parents. But those are really good. If you do them in the mini pie tins, then they're like single serves and you can grab them. And part of that you could always make homemade where you do and you make the pie crust yourself, which I always make a butter crust. But to simplify it, to make it easier, you could always go out and buy pie crusts and do that. And then you just have to make the filling, and that you could actually whip that up pretty quickly. And I think that would be a pleaser because who doesn't love a chicken pot pie? Or I don't know, it's just it kind of depends on, what you're like serving there on it. You could always do like if you have just like a classic, I want to say, I'm always there. You could always make homemade bread because everybody loves bread, like sourdough bread. My mom just had a potluck at work and she brought, not bread she made, she brought bread I made to her potluck. But that is always a good hit where you have that, you put some butter or a nice jam with it. Everybody loves bread.
For those wanting to learn how to do sourdough, do you have any recipe cards or videos?
I do. So I have actually, and this is available for everybody, not just our members, because I made that available for everyone. But hold on a second. I have a series of videos on how you can make your own starter from the very beginning, like what tools you need, what ingredients, and then what you do every single day for a week, because it takes about a week to get it ready there. And then I also have recipe cards and videos on how you can make your very first sourdough from start to finish, because it is a good like step process that needs a bit of time. Once you've got it down, it's really easy, but there are terminologies like laminating, stretch and folds that if you don't know what those mean, it can be a little bit challenging and difficult to understand, but I walk through those steps. Also, like you have to use unbleached flour because it gives you a better result. So I have those available on like the link on our page and you can watch, and as well as recipe cards for everybody. That is just allows you to create it from your own. And it's a wonderful journey, but it is definitely something that you can't just wake up and say, hey, I'm going to make sourdough bread today. It takes about a week to get there. But once you've got your starter up and ready, you can make sourdough bread and have a loaf in your fridge proofing every single day. We're going to get this in and we're going to finish up our salad and our dressing, and then we'll be ready to kind of serve up here. I'm going to get this last batch of chicken tenders in. We'll kind of snuggle this one in there. Okay, and here are pears. As you can see, we've got them starting to sweat out their juices, which is beautiful. That means they're going to be ready soon. And we're going to finish up our vinaigrette. So right now I just put in our mayo in there. So I like to do for a creamier one, which is going to also make it work well for a dip. I did like half mayo, half olive oil. So you can kind of see it's half and half in there. That's going to give you the richness to it. We're going to use about 2 tablespoons of a good Dijon mustard. Give it a little bit more. And as my husband always says, this is the bougie Dijon mustard, because apparently this is the one of the high class based on their commercials in the early 90s. There we go. So about 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard. We're going to use a little, you can use fresh ginger, but I find that a ginger paste works well. We're going to use just about a half a teaspoon of ginger paste, but it's going to give it a little bit of a tanginess that works really well. We're going to use about a teaspoon of garlic. You can mash up to a really fine mince some fresh garlic if you want, but this is one where I said the garlic works well with it because it has a good acidity in it that pairs well with the vinegar and the lemon juice. Let me give this a good stir. Coat this, guys, up. Beautiful. And then we're going to do about 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. You want to use an apple cider vinegar because it has a nice sweetness to it that kind of pairs well. So 2 tablespoons of that, and then essentially 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. Let me grab my juicer in here, which I'm just going to use whatever we get out of this lemon. So it will get us there. Here. And then, whoops, grab that. Then we're going to use the honey, which is going to give us that sweet flavor. Now, this is where if you want it sweeter, you can go even more. I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of honey in here, but you can go up to 4 tablespoons for it. And then we're going to give this a really good shake up, and that will be our honey Dijon vinaigrette dressing type thing. It will be nice and creamy because of that mustard. Okay, we're going to throw together our salad here, and then we will be ready to plate up. We're keeping our salad fairly simple because we're going to have, the chicken on it. We have our spice pears. We take this out. We're going to give it a quick little taste. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to grab a bowl here. Got to set one out for our salad. We're going to keep our salad really, really simple. You could save a couple pears before you put them in there. You could put pears in here or sliced apples or pomegranate. But since we have our spiced pears as a side, we're doing it a little thing. So we're going to do about 2 cups spinach with some arugula, which has a lemony pepper flavor to it, a little bit of a spice, but it's going to work really well with that honey Dijon. We're going to mix up our 2 things. You can also just use, if you don't like the greens, you can use just good old romaine or iceberg if you like that. But I feel like mixing the arugula into this just works well with that Dijon mustard. So we've got those kind of toasted off. We are going to add in some walnuts. You can use candied walnuts if you want to. A couple good shakes over it. And that's what we're going to just keep on our thing. It's really simple because we'll have our chicken and then we'll have our vinaigrette on it. And we have our spiced pears over here. Okay, so we have about 5 pears in here with a squeeze of some lemon juice, brown sugar, cinnamon. We are going to just add a pinch of cornstarch. And grab that real quick. This cornstarch, you don't have to do it, but I will say my family absolutely loves that little jelly texture, and it makes all the natural juices cling to it. So we're just going to sprinkle a little bit over. I like to add it at the end instead of early on, but just a really light dusting over. We'll probably use about, a half a tablespoon. But that's why I add a little bit of butter into my mix when we're making it, because I find that the butter takes away, that bit of fat takes away the chalkiness that sometimes cornstarch can give. And that just helps make it just the perfect amount of sweetness. And just do it in batches. Don't just dump all of it in at one time. That way you'll know exactly how much you need, but you're not going to get any like thick clumps of it. Here we go. As you can see, it's already kind of thickened up. And we're just about there. Okay. Beautiful. Perfect. Now you can see those that sauce is just clinging onto the pears now. Beautiful. Okay, let's see if my chicken here, oh, I forget my tongs, need a quick flip. And then we should be about ready to serve up. We'll baste our cornbread one more time and then be ready to plate. Get these guys all flipped over. Perfect. And again, go low and slow on it. That way you get this beautiful golden crust and it's nice and delicious. Okay, let's do our cornbread one more time. So we coated it when it first kind of came out when it was nice and hot. Now this second time really gives you this nice sticky on top. But that first time is to infuse that honey and butter flavor into it.
Question, are you going to be streaming tonight?
We will be streaming tonight. I'm going to be making a beef bourguignon for dinner tonight. Although I'll probably, the first part of it, we might do a little video of that because that needs to cook in the oven for a while. But we will be videotaping our dinner tonight. I'm making some sourdough rolls, mashed potatoes, all sorts of deliciousness. And then let me grab, where is it in here? Perfect. This will be a little extra to dip our chicken in. Okay, grab a tongs. I've got that. I've got that. Let's get ready to serve up lunch. So today for lunch, we're going to have just a simple arugula spinach walnut salad that we're going to drizzle our homemade honey mustard creamy vinaigrette over the top. And then I'm going to save a little bit of that to dip my chicken in. We have some hand breaded and fried chicken tenders that we seasoned with oregano, onion powder, Lowry seasoned salt, a good serving of spiced pears for a nice touch of sweetness, and then of course, definitely worth the wait, but we have our homemade honey butter cornbread with this just lovely honey butter flavor all the way throughout. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and then search for what we made, and you can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Hexclad pans, my Dutch ovens, my bakeware, knives, cutting boards, all the different things I use in the kitchen. I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.